Good morning, everyone. And like all of our speakers, the Isokinetic group, thank you for organizing what's going to be a wonderful conference. And Stefano, again, my 8th year in a row, you've invited me to speak and allowed me to share my experiences with a wonderful audience. I truly am standing on the shoulders of giants in this room. I recognize that, and I'm honored to be able to speak at this opening session. Thank you. Perhaps this session could be looked upon a little bit differently, inspiring stories of all of us in this room who have guided athletes back from injury. This isn't filled with athletes in this room, except for my gentleman on the stage here, of course, but it's filled with healthcare professionals. But what's unique in 2019 is we bring lots of other sports together and other professionals from around the world, and we have a chance to see a different perspective. And what I'm going to think is that by the Monday, we're going to realize we have far more in common than we have in difference regarding where we're from and what kind of sports and how we're treating our athletes. Over 30 years, I've been fortunate to work with many different sports and many different athletes, and I've been a part of their journey and helping them to achieve a successful outcome or a successful result. But we really need to understand oftentimes, what do we mean by recovery? You see, a colleague told me many years ago that words create images and images create actions. So understanding the word and understanding what we mean by recovery is important to help you shape your own approach as to how you're going to help athletes. Everything you do and every approach you take to help an athlete can have a positive or negative consequence. I've been a part of many positive results and positive outcomes, but I've also witnessed many decisions that are made or to create an inaction which ends up with a negative consequence. It's important to realize that our action or our inaction affects possibly whether this is a successful outcome or a successful result, and realizing that maybe that changes it from an inspiring or an uninspiring story. So what do we mean by recovery, and who gets to define that? Is it the doctor? Is it the surgeon? Is it structural? Is it the athlete themselves who get to make a definition of, did I reach my goals? Did I have a successful result? Is it a good story? Is it the media? Is it the fans? Because they certainly will tell you whether an athlete has had a successful return. Maybe the classic view of this are examples where a progressive approach led to an accelerated and a successful outcome for a professional athlete. And even better, they win a medal. But maybe not. Maybe it's just that after a horrible injury and a horrible accident, they're able to come back to a level of sport that they can retire on or just participate in and achieve a goal. It's not always about winning. It's about representing. But in this field, it's very simple. If it works out, you're forward-thinking, you're progressive, you made good decisions, the athlete had a good result. But boy, in a split second, these inspiring stories can become uninspiring. And before you know it, you're careless or you're reckless for making the decisions that you did to help this athlete. So an inspiring story. In the build-up to 2006 Olympics, I worked with this young athlete. She was 16 years old. I did all of her performance training, her physical training, everything off of the snowboard for 2 years. In the final event, before the Olympics, she landed awkwardly and she had a knee injury. We had 3 weeks to prepare. The advice from the medical director of the national team and the physiotherapists was, of course, do no harm, don't take any risk. Decrease the risk of causing any problems prior to the athlete traveling to the Olympics, and we're going to go for it. I understand what the rationale and the reasoning behind that was. But you don't win a medal if you don't take risks. So the approach, because I had worked with this athlete for so many years, was we pushed. We were as progressive as we could possibly be while respecting the healing process, but you don't win a medal if you don't push. In this case, it worked out. In this case, female mountain biker. I started working with her in 2010 because she had a hip labral repair. It worked out well. I stayed with all of her strength and conditioning, her performance training, everything off the bike, of course. And then in January, she had the opposite hip and she needed surgery. So late January, hip labor repair. Mid-March, 6 weeks later, she's riding for fitness, proper bike riding on the roads, and then in the woods eventually, of course. Mid-May, sets a personal record on a hill climb. This is a 25-minute intensive uphill climb where they go to a camp every year in California. Sets a personal record. Early June, enters a low-level race and wins. Mid-June, enters a high-level caliber international event, gets 5th. Then from there, goes to a 7-day stage race. Not at the same level of preparation as everyone in that race, because she was coming back from the injury and she wins. Wins the US National Championships later, and then gets a medal at the World Championships. It's her best year in her career. Again, we did not follow a standard protocol coming back from this hip injury. We treated what was in front of us. We moved prudently, but aggressively. So inspiring stories for medical and performance professionals in this room. Maybe that's what this session should be discussing. But the reality is there's many inspiring stories of world-class recoveries by average athletes. Not everyone wins the medals, not everyone wins the Olympic title and so forth, but they still have a world-class recovery. Stories of motivated athletes who were inspired by a world-class approach to fully recover. That's where this talk eventually goes. What is the approach that we're using? Because I don't think the sport really makes a difference or where we come from. If it's a world-class approach, you have a chance to get a world-class result. Again, words create images, images create actions. What's your approach, your path, your style, the technique and the attitude of how you do things? Have you defined it to yourself? And if you're a director of a program, if you're a decision maker, how are you developing the approach for the people you work with or who work under you? Are you open-minded? Are you willing to have conversations about why you're doing and why you're recommending things? Are you willing to be challenged? Do you welcome that opportunity to improve? All of us have been influenced by a teacher, a coach, a mentor, an advisor, and their experiences shape your experiences typically for the positive or for the negative. And I look at this and I say there's real 3 key elements that are going on. They've been very much a part of my journey: experience, evidence, and examples. And how you travel through this journey and how you navigate these 3 things and who you are working with and being taught by makes a decision or makes an impact on you. I probably spent 12 to 15 years in experience and examples before I really had the evidence to understand why I was working, and then use that evidence and science to support what I had been doing, what I had experienced. The art and the science come together. The experience-based evidence, which is what I really cut my teeth on, an evidence-based experience that followed. And I learned we had to make these connections on a regular basis. It can't just be about the science. You have to have experience, and you need to hear and see other examples. This session is doing just that. It's sharing examples of what has gone really well. And not that you have to repeat these examples exactly, but you should learn from these examples. There's a methodology that teaches little kids to understand and comprehend reading. And they look at this and say, from text to self, as you read a story and read a book, it means, can you make a connection in that book to something that has happened to you personal, a very personal experience that you can reflect on when you were an athlete, let's say. And then text to text, that's reading these research papers or books and making connections to other books and other papers, starting to connect the dots even though they may be involved in different disciplines. And then text to world. Text to worlds are examples where other people in this world are sharing what they've learned and what they've done. You use them to help support your journey. So here's a way to learn from an experience, positive or negative. This particular athlete was a famous ski racer. He had a knee dislocation in 1983, and he had his operation by Dr. Stedman, a well-known orthopedic surgeon. He asked, after 3.5 months or so, 3 months, can I get back to skiing on one ski up on the glacier? Remember, he is world class, and it's a very common thing that alpine skiers do, just to be outside and do some things. He said yes. So Mark Girardelli sends a photo back and says, Doc, thank you so much for my recovery. He hadn't returned back to competition yet, but I really appreciate everything you've done for me. You know the rest. The difference was when he was skiing on one ski, he was skiing on the involved leg. He pushed the boundaries, and these group learned to say, perhaps there's a different way that we should be looking at how to rehabilitate. Another experience, this athlete tore his ACL and his MCL. He came back after 14 weeks and he played in a professional game. There are reasons why he made those decisions. He came back successfully, except in that first game back, he caught a pass, he landed on his kneecap, he fractured his kneecap, he had had a bone-tendon-bone reconstruction done. The kneecap was probably still weak. And everyone looked at that as a failure. It didn't work out. But I only saw that as, let's discover and talk about what did work out. How do they get to that position to be able to compete? So what we learn is that a compliant athlete in a very progressive protocol or a non-compliant athlete in a conservative protocol, you can still learn from these. Versus having an opinion to say he shouldn't have done that, look deeper and find out what could be learned. This athlete was one of mine in 2001. We're preparing for surgery. So we like to see this and say, let's get ready for 3 or 4 weeks, 5 weeks when possible to get ready for the surgery. We use skiing as part of the preparation. But it showed me and let me understand that neuromuscular control is one of the best braces on the market. It allows you to be stable. And then this took us to 14 weeks post-surgery, and we're back skiing. They weren't racing at 5 months like in our previous example this morning. It was just to get more days on snow with good repetitions at the appropriate level. I've said this before at this conference, injury doesn't matter, the approach is the same. Whether it's an ankle, a knee, a hip, or a shoulder, I look at how I go about this process the same way. Because you have a situation, the athlete's moving well, they get injured, and they're no longer moving well. That's the problem. What are we doing to fix that? I want to restore normal movements, then I want to restore normal sport movements as quickly as I possibly can. Not to get them back to competition earlier, but to spend more time at being normal and healthy. This athlete had a medial meniscal repair done. This was an example of weeks 1 through 8 post-op. We got him back to skating at 10 weeks after the surgery. But he needed a full conditioning because he missed his preseason. So he's attempting to slide back into the NHL, having missed his entire build-up, 6-week preparation of fitness. He returned to competition at 16 weeks post-op. I'm sorry for the audio, there shouldn't be any. But returned to competition at 16 weeks post-op. Well, that's not that crazy to think about after a medial meniscal repair. But again, the difference was he needed 6 weeks of high-intensity training to be physically prepared. The successful return is in his first game back, he scores a goal. He's 2 years into this knee, and it's doing very well. It's a balancing act, especially for a lot of the decision makers in this room. Do you prepare? Do you protect? Oftentimes, we have to prepare very quickly because it's in the best interest of the athlete. It's what they want to do. It's what they're trying to achieve. And many times, we need to protect the athlete from himself or herself. But this is where we learn to push, but we also do it intelligently. Another inspiring example, in this case, 2009, this athlete has a hip labral repair. It's okay. But at 6 weeks post, he's hitting. He needs to enter the season ready to go. So at 6 weeks post, he's back to baseball training. At 9 weeks post hip labral repair, in his first game back, in the first pitch he hits a home run. That makes a difference on how that can carry an athlete's confidence. Goes on to win the World Series. So stories of motivated athletes who were inspired by us, motivated professional, medicine individuals, physiotherapists, doctors. If we're motivated, the likelihood that they have a more effective recovery exists. So this is about inspiring stories, but inspiring stories of decision makers who wanted to pursue the best approach. Oftentimes, the surgeons, the doctors, the head physiotherapists, they're the decision makers. And if they have inspiring experiences and they have an inspiring approach, they influence the future people helping athletes. So, make connections. Over the course of these 3 days, we should be making connections with many other people and many other cultures and many different sports to find out what we have in common and to learn from one another. Thank you very much.